why are you holding hands? And I said, is it any of your business? And they were like, well, are you gay? Are you gay? And I was like, what does it matter to you? And then they just started hitting us and kicking us. Talking to some friends about, as a black man, and they were like, you're not black, you're mixed. And I was really taken aback by that because I didn't think one precluded me from being the other. I thought I was mixed and black.
We're building the world's largest archive of LGBTQ+, global majority, and migrant stories. Every voice you hear helps preserve our shared history and inspire the next generation. If our mission speaks to you, show your support, subscribe to our channel, and share your story in the comments below. One voice, one story at a time. This is Oral Histories.
Hello, my name is Pratish, and I'm here today with...
Hi, I'm Dean Atta.
Would you like to describe your identity in terms of sexuality and gender and cultural background a little bit more in depth and how you associate with those labels, basically?
Yeah, so growing up, I didn't like labels when I was younger. I didn't really want to label my sexuality. I really didn't know how to place myself in terms of race. I knew I was mixed, but I know as a mixed person, you're not necessarily the sum of your parts, because if you've got one white parent and one black parent, you don't really have the option to be white. You are only black or mixed. So it was very interesting kind of living in a single parent household with my white mum. My black dad wasn't in the household, although I saw him occasionally and I saw his family quite regularly, but I didn't have a strong relationship with my dad. So growing up, everything was informed by my mum. She's the first person, in the family that I came out to when I came out as gay. She's someone who always supported me in my choices as to how I wanted to define myself. And she was very supportive of me coming out. She's also supportive of me learning more about my kind of black heritage and Jamaican heritage. But yeah, being gay was something I knew I was, but I was also Christian. So went to Church of England's primary school and secondary school. I wasn't sure what it would be like when I came out. I knew or believed at the time it was a sin to be gay. So I was very conflicted about when I would come out, if I would come out. And it was more of an accident because I had a crush on a boy at 15 and I just decided I would ask him out. Obviously, by doing that at school, then everyone finds out that I'm gay, and then it gets around the school, and then I eventually have to tell my mum because, it wasn't entirely easy. There were some people that were a bit mean to me at school, so I had to go home and tell my mum that I was gay because some people had been bullying me basically. But she was very supportive. I mean, at first she said, well, don't listen to what they say. If you know you're not gay, it's fine. I was like, I am gay, mummy, I am. And I was crying and she comforted me. And the first thing she warned me about was, HIV and making sure I would use condoms if I was going to have sex. And that was a bit of because I wasn't really even thinking about it at 15. I wasn't thinking about sex really. I just wanted a boyfriend to hold his hand and, maybe kiss. It can just have someone to love. But because my coming out was, in the 90s, and prior to that, in the 80s, there was the HIV AIDS kind of crisis. And that was something that was very much still in the forefront of people's minds at that time. So, there was a big fear in the air. And so that was something that I think had cast a shadow on my queer identity. It was that fear around sex and contracting HIV. I will be really honest. And that's something I've, written about and so I'm happy to talk about. But yeah, it's something that I kind of had to work through over many years. That kind of the sexualization of sexuality. And I know maybe that sounds strange, but I don't always feel like sexuality has to be thought of entirely in the terms of who you're having sex with. It's also who you love, the self-expression, and who you feel a kinship to. So there's a lot more to it than just who you have sex with, even though sexuality has the word sex in it. It doesn't have to be all about sex.
What are the other key moments of your journey in your self-discovery that you think had a huge impact on you?
So other than my coming out, I think it was going to university and having almost a clean slate, like a space where no one knew me. Although it turned out there was one or two people that went to my primary school that turned up at university, but I didn't know they would be there. But it had been a long time since I'd seen them. But yeah, when I got to university, it was a chance to decide who I was and how I wanted to be identified. And the main part of my identity that I put to the forefront was my creativity. So I'd introduce myself as, hey, I'm Dean, I'm a poet. And that was the thing that I was most proud of and that I wanted to be known for. And I did all the open mics on campus and I made sure at all the talent shows I performed my poetry. And I just, really wanted to be known for it. And I was doing philosophy and English literature at university. So I made sure to do some creative writing and write poetry for English where I could. And even in my philosophy, I would write creatively from some of my essays. So we were studying Plato and I chose to do, instead of an essay on it, I did some dialogue. So I did it like a script and it was really fun. And the teacher, it was my best mark at university. So I was really emphasizing my talent, my creativity, and the fact that I was a writer. That was kind of how I wanted to be known before anything else. So yeah, so that was kind of what I really enjoyed being known as, and kind of still to this day, I feel like that's kind of what I put to the forefront of my kind of identifying factors of who I am, is like writer, and then all the other things that come, like my race and my sexuality and my gender and my, politics or whatever else might define a person, my values.
Going forward, has your identity evolved over time, how you identify yourself or how you have your relationships with different labels?
I think over time I've allowed myself to be more fluid. So use terms on different days or in different situations, and not to be so rigid with my identity. I feel like a lot of identity can be quite fluid. Some of our identities matter in a kind of like protected characteristics and our human rights, and we have to kind of make sure that we enshrine kind of protections for people's identities. But if you're in a situation where you do have those protections in place, then you have a bit more space to think about, okay, but who am I outside of that, beyond that, or within that? And so for me, my kind of interests and my other values will come into play as well. So I just give myself a bit more freedom to kind of like move between identities, even though the world may see me just one way. When you see me, you'll see a Black or mixed race man. And if I'm being kind of flamboyant, you might know I'm gay or assume I'm gay straight away. But, and I don't mind that because I live, in a country where I feel safe to be those things. Like I don't face racism every day on the street and I don't face homophobia every day in the street. So I feel like I can take sometimes my race and my sexuality for granted and not kind of worry. And then I can allow other parts of me to be kind of put to the forefront and to explore them more.
Have you felt the tension between protecting, say the labels, because like you said, it can be at times very important, and sometimes you do want to identify as more fluid. Have you at any point felt that sort of tension between the two, or has it something that you've just been okay with age?
It's more been when people have told me I'm not something or assumed I am something. So to give examples to both of those, like when I was younger, when I went to university and I was at joined the kind of African, Caribbean and Asian Society as it was at the time. And I wanted to run to be president of that society. And I was talking to some friends about, as a Black man, and they were like, you're not Black, you're mixed. And I was like, and I was really taken aback by that because I didn't think one precluded me from being the other. Like I thought I was mixed and Black, because that's just how I had identified. And I became certain of that as kind of time went on, that, I can choose to identify as Black because I have one Black parent And, I could never choose to identify as white, of course, but I don't think the way the world's set up, racism is, works in one direction, really. So I felt very sure that my blackness was something I was going to assert to anyone that challenged that, and I was the one to define, whether I was black or mixed or both. And then the other was kind of maybe 10 or so years ago when I was doing drag, and then people started to question my gender identity and wondered if I was non-binary, like was asking me if I was going to be using they, them pronouns. And I was like, and it was the first couple times when I got asked when I was turning up to performances or in certain queer spaces, in drag spaces where, people were checking my pronouns because they were checking with everyone. But then sometimes people were assuming I was they, them, or maybe just using they, them for everyone as a kind of way of kind of not getting it wrong. But I was like, no, I'm pretty sure I'm a man, and so therefore I'm a cis man. And it was interesting because I had a period where I was like, do I want to think about my identity in terms of gender? But I was like, no, I don't feel like I'm not a man. I just feel like men should be able to have more freedom to be more expressive of their emotions and the way they dress and the way they act. And, I don't think man should be restrictive. And so if I can be an example of a man that's a bit more, free with his kind of enjoying femininity as well as your masculinity, that is what I do, rather than opt out of being a man and, say I'm non-binary. Because although I wish masculinity and being a man wasn't policed so strongly, like in terms of like, if in certain places, you might get comments or, even attacked for being camp and, walking down the street flamboyantly or, wearing certain clothes or wearing makeup. But the more men that do it, the more men will be able to do it, So for me, it was just about, it wouldn't solve the real world issues like changing my pronouns. And I never felt like I was not a man. I just wished men had more freedom for expression. Obviously, men have a lot of privilege in this world, but that freedom to express themselves, to show emotion, to dress how they want, to wear makeup, to kind of be, tender with each other. It's not there for all men, and I wish it was, But yeah, so that was one time where I was just kind of like, would a non-binary identity or gender fluid identity, would that sit right with me? And I think because I was doing drag, it kind of opened me up a lot more to how I dressed and how I acted and kind of like how I felt about myself. And I wish I'd done it earlier. I did it at 30. So that was, 10 years ago. I did it at 30. And I wish I'd done it as a teenager because I think I spent a lot of time in my teens and 20s worrying about being camp and feeling like, oh, in this situation, when you're with these people, you should act straight. And, when I visited family in Jamaica, I was very much straight acting and hiding the fact that I was gay because I was scared, not necessarily of my family, but anyone else outside of my family finding out. And because it's a country where it's illegal to be gay and people get beaten and, killed and arrested and terrible things happen to gay people there. And so I just was very worried on those trips to Jamaica. And I think there's certain parts of London where I still feel like there's high risk of being abused, attacked if you're gay. So I still have times where I am, for want of a better word, straight acting. But yeah, less so as I get older. I'm more feeling comfortable in my skin and kind of in myself and my identity.
We have talked about religion before, but is there like something in particular in that cultural influences that have also shaped your journey?
Yeah, I mean, the Church of England schools I went to were good, and I got a good education, and I felt like, the bullying that happened lots of people got bullied for lots of different reasons. But I think the overall way that the school would deal with bullying would be like, what would Jesus do? Jesus loved everyone. And so that was kind of their way of kind of making all bullying bad, but not necessarily saying it was like okay to be gay or good to be gay, or but they just said, Jesus loved everyone. We mustn't pick on anyone for their differences, and that was kind of it. And I remember like being out and asking the school chaplain about like, being gay, is it a sin? And they said, well, yes. But it's the sex that's the sin. So if you have these feelings, but you don't act on them, you should be okay. And you can have friends, but you can't have sexual partners. And, he even went so far as to say, like, Jesus had 12 very close male friends, the disciples. So it was, it was funny when I think back to it. But you would also hear that phrase, I don't know if you've heard it before, but it was, it's Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. And I remember hearing that quite often and feeling like so annoyed. But I think, for a long time, religion has kind of been something I've kind of felt in opposition to. But as I've had, more experience, especially like when I went to university, I met people of lots of different religions as well. And I felt a lot more exposed to kind of just good people from all religions. And I felt like it's not the people that are bad, and it's not even the religion, it's those that choose to interpret any given religion to preach hatred. And so I felt less upset about my own Christian upbringing and saw that this can happen in any religion with people who want to use it for their own purposes. So, and then I've also met queer religious people, and gone to queer or LGBT churches. And so, and kind of met people that their religion is a huge part of their identity and they are LGBT. And that feels like progress. And I feel like that's changed my perspective on things. And so I feel a bit more open and less opposed to religion as a queer person now. And outside of that, just being around longer. I think my culture, you think your culture is just your family. Like, so, you're brought up in a culture, but you kind of have to see beyond your family's interpretation of their culture and meet people in your own right as well. So like for me, it's been, going to Cyprus and meeting queer Cypriot people that I would have never met through my family, for example. So, and I'm part of a group in London called the LGBTQ Cypriot Diaspora Group, and that includes Greek and Turkish Cypriot people, which is really great because Cyprus is a divided island, but this group, unifies people through their queerness as a common thing. And that's been lovely having queer Cypriot friends because when I went on family holidays to Cyprus, I never really encountered any queer people. So for me, it's been about finding people of my kind of heritage or cultural background outside of my family. And kind of, I know quite a few queer Jamaican people, obviously, outside of my family, even though within my family, I don't know anyone else who's queer. But and so it's kind of finding the intersections that you need to find. And it might not always be from your family. It could be like chosen family or people that kind of complement your family and have that shared kind of background, but, might not share blood with you,
That leads us perfectly into the following question, which is like, can you describe the role of chosen family or community in your life?
Yeah. I mean, I belong to several communities. So the poetry community is a big one for me. And lots of people I know are poets, and they come from all sorts of backgrounds. And, so some of them are queer, some of them are Black, some of them are other ethnicities and other kind of class backgrounds as well. And, and I feel that's really been really interesting. Kind of poetry and spoken word, being involved in that world was a very democratic space where people from lots of different backgrounds could access it. And when I travel around the world, I go to poetry events and meet lots of different people. So I feel that's a really special thing that I have. I think also, through literature and being a writer in general, I've met lots of great people, and especially other queer writers who have kind of like been really supportive of me. I've gotten involved in various initiatives, like I mentioned, the LGBTQ Cypriot diaspora group. I've also been involved with UK Black Pride and going to that and meeting lots of great people through that space, as well as being a patron for LGBT plus History Month, which is a wonderful organization that, obviously we know every February we have LGBT History Month, but they do work all year round to make sure that kind of happens in a really unified and organized way, so that great resources get out there to people who want to run events, and they design a kind of theme for every year so that we're focusing on different things each year so that we can celebrate all sorts of different LGBTQ plus people. I'm currently mentoring a young person through a charity called Just Like Us, and they have a great community of young LGBT people and then older people who are their mentors, who want to kind of make a difference for, and it's an intergenerational conversation. And I think that's something we as queer people need to do more of, talk to our elders and be in touch with the younger people to offer role models, mentors, support, advice. When I was younger, I used to volunteer at a youth group called Out on Thursdays, which was run by a man called Ralph Hutton. And that was in Hammersmith. And I used to love doing that because I didn't go to an LGBT youth group when I was younger. But when I was, in my 20s, volunteering at it, was lovely to see these young people as young as 15 coming along and having people that understood what they were going through. When I was coming out at 15, I didn't have anyone at my school who was also out. So I had no one really to turn to immediately around me. And so it's lovely to have these groups. And so to be, when I get to be a mentor or a volunteer in these kind of spaces, I just feel so happy for the young people that are benefiting from them, that this is there for them now. Because when I was at school, we had Section 28, which meant that teachers couldn't say it was okay to be gay, couldn't have LGBT books in school, teachers weren't allowed to come out as gay. So, that was the whole time I was at school, because I started school, primary school in 1988, and I left secondary school in 2003. Those are the years that Section 28 was in place in England. So that was my whole school career where, no one could tell me it was okay to be gay, and I had no role models around me in school. So I had to look to TV, I had to look to, books and films. But in my life, there was very few people. And it was thankfully my mum who introduced me to Ralph Hutton, who I ended up volunteering with Out on Thursdays. And he was a great role model. Through the arts is where I think I made most of my mentors and role models. People like Topher Campbell, who's a great theatre maker and director and artist and filmmaker, and Ricky Beadle-Blair, who's all of those things as well, makes film, theatre, TV. Ajamu X, who is a photographer and artist. Campbell X, who's a filmmaker. Lady Phil, who set up UK Black Pride. Sue Sanders, who started Schools Out and LGBT plus History Month. Like, these people that I met through being a poet and being out and about on the scene, and these people would offer me opportunities or advice or encouragement, and I'm able to go to them when I need a little bit of support or kind of advice and encouragement. And that is just really great to have these queer elders that I can turn to, because as wonderful as my mum is, she's straight, and so she doesn't have that shared lived experience with me. So I have great support in my family, but I don't, apart from, I have one aunt who's gay, but she doesn't live in this country, so I don't see her as much. But otherwise, there's no one else I know of in my family who's also queer. So I have to look outside my family for those people that understand my lived experience. And so I'm grateful that I found them and that they've stuck by me. And I hope I'm that for other people too, like the elder or the peer, the sibling, the queer sibling. Like, I think I've got lots of queer friends that it is more than friendship at this point. It is like we are siblings. And and it's a wonderful feeling to have people that understand you so fully and accept you completely. Because for some of us, when we go home to our families, we're putting parts of us, leaving parts of ourselves outside the door when we step into the family home. Whereas with a lot of my chosen family, they see me completely and understand me and accept me fully. So that just is, everyone should feel that in some way with some of people in their lives, because it's like breathing fresh air for the first time.
In light of that, is there any incident or any specific moment that comes to you where you face discrimination or exclusion as a queer person of color?
Yeah. The one time that comes to mind where I faced, discrimination and an attack was I was with a partner walking on the South Bank of London. So kind of near the Globe Theatre, on the River Thames. And we were just holding hands and we carried on walking, but we felt there were people behind us, but we didn't really look back, and we carried on walking. And then they were closer to us, and it was a group of boys that were kind of circling us. And I was in my mid-20s and these boys were probably in their late teens. So I didn't feel immediately scared because I'd already started doing work in schools. And so they looked like the kids I taught in schools. And so I just felt like they'll listen to me. They will be reasonable. And they were like, "What are you guys doing? Why are you holding hands?" And I said, "Is it any of your business?" And they were like, "Well, are you gay? Are you gay?" And I was like, "What does it matter to you?" And then they just started hitting us and kicking us. And we, I think they said something like, "We don't do that round here." And that was kind of the phrase that really stuck with me, because I was like, round here, in central London, yes, we do. And it was just, they obviously felt some ownership over some part of London that they lived in. But I just was, at the time I was just scared. But when I reflected on it, I was angry and I was sad for them and for myself. But at the time I was just scared. And me and my boyfriend at the time, we ran and ran and ran. And we actually, running to the tube station, ran past 2 police officers. We didn't even think to stop them at the time because we just wanted to get to safety, get home really. And so when we got back to my mum's, she was like, "Did you speak to the police?" And I was like, "No." She was like, "We need to tell the police." And so we did that. But it was really interesting that we didn't instinctively see the police as safety. The only place we thought would be safe was getting back home. And so, when we reported it to the police, there was a great LGBT liaison officer that spoke to us and reassured us and that they take this seriously, and these people were in the wrong and we did nothing wrong, and that this shouldn't happen, and it's illegal and it's a hate crime, and just good reassurances. But they didn't manage to catch the boys, and also it affected the relationship with that partner. We felt nervous thereafter, outside, holding hands, or we just didn't really recover from it because it was so traumatic for both of us. So we split, and it was there's always a kind of if that hadn't happened, would we have survived as a relationship? Or it was just a really sad thing for me, and for those boys that feel they could attack people for something that was none of their business, that they. And I always wondered, what's going on in these boys' lives that they need to punch down, and they need to find someone, as a big group to attack 2 people, was really cowardly, I think, the way they acted. And I just think that really disturbs me. And when I started going to schools, I was like, I wonder if any of my students do things like this, because it made me look at people differently, and it made me actually more open with my sexuality, because I wanted the students I work with, to see a gay person. I don't want to be shy about the fact that I'm gay. So where it was relevant, I just mention it. And so I remember being in a classroom and, I'd already was out to the students, but one of the students was didn't want to do something "Oh, that's so gay." And I was like, "Excuse me?" They're like, "Oh, not gay like you, sir, just gay like rubbish." And I was like, "Well, gay doesn't mean rubbish. If it's rubbish, it's rubbish. If you don't want to do it, just say, I don't want to do it. Don't say it's gay." And they're like, "Okay, sir, sorry, sir." And it was they weren't, but it's just, language is important to me as a writer. So kind of hearing them just use that word gay so flippantly, I had to pull them up on it. But I think it was an interesting interaction. And I just think now when I go into schools, because I've written books about, gay characters, it's a bit more at the forefront of what I'm talking about. Before I'd written those books, it would just kind of come up in a conversation, and sometimes the students would be surprised, be like, "Oh, you're gay, sir?" And I was like, "Yeah." I'm like, "That's it." Like, and that would be it. Like, but it was still important to me to not hide that from my students, so that they had at least met a gay person, like, so that they could kind of not feel like it was some far off thing that they didn't know anything about, like, because I just wanted to make sure that also there'll be probably a few gay kids in the class. And so if the adult in the room is confident and happy and proud of who they are, then they might feel like that's possible for them too. And more so now, I'm going into schools and I see kids with rainbow pin badges, and I see the school has an LGBT club that meets at lunchtimes or after school. And in the library, they have a display of LGBT books, and they do assemblies about, LGBT History Month or Pride Month. And it's changing. And it makes me feel good that what it was like for me at school, where there was no conversation about it, apart from the fact that Jesus had a lot of male friends. But now there is, people can be more open, and it feels like, there's a lot more chance for young people to figure out who they are earlier and feel accepted earlier.
Yeah, and then to move a bit more about, I know you've spoken about it before, but can you speak more about your first involvement with LGBTQ plus spaces or activism?
I think some of my early involvements was through Ruckus Archive, which is like a Black queer archive. So run by or set up by Topher Campbell and Ajamu X. And I was briefly one of their trustees, but more importantly, like, they just kind of introduced me to the idea of like archiving Black queer life and Black queer stories through the arts, through club flyers, through, like just this ephemera, stuff that, gets printed up. And then like, before everything was online, we had, magazines, we had flyers and posters, and we had, and zines and things that maybe aren't archived more formally in the British Library or aren't archived digitally. Now they've got a great archive in London Metropolitan Archives. And I think that was great to see. And I wrote a monologue for one of their productions, but also just kind of being around them and seeing how they move through arts and archiving and grassroots and with big institutions. I find it really fascinating. You don't have to choose which space to occupy. You can kind of like move between different spaces. And I think that's a very queer thing to do. So yeah, they were kind of two big role models for me. And Ruckus Archives was a really interesting initiative that's still going and still growing, but kind of has times of activity and times of, less activity because of the nature of something like that, where you need to get funding to do more work on it, But for me, that was a big one. And then also, I think my first queer spaces, if I'm really honest, was like online chat rooms and clubs. And, before dating apps or, that kind of thing, it was, like going to clubs or going to online chat rooms and speaking to people there. But there was a level of like anonymity sometimes in the chat rooms that was sometimes a bit disconcerting, because you didn't know if you were really talking to who they said they were. And then even with clubs, there'd be people that you'd see in the clubs, maybe even dance with, maybe even kiss. But then if you saw them on the street, they'd ignore you because they weren't out. And so that would be sometimes quite heartbreaking. Like, so I found those spaces less and less to my liking. And I found myself more wanting to be in relation, whether it's friendship or romantically, with people who were out, completely out, and rather than people who kind of were in a different space, not wanting to be out. So I found that was really a challenge sometimes, because I'd meet and date really lovely people, but they would want to keep the relationship on the down low. So, be like, if you see with my friends, just walk past. And I'd be like, I can't live like that. And I've put some of that into some of my writing in my young adult novels. I have had characters who don't want to come out and, shown their rationale for that, whether it's, cultural, religious reasons, or just kind of that's their preference to not be out because of the homophobia that is real in the world. So, but yeah, that was a really interesting kind of mix of experiences, meeting really out and proud people like Topher and Ajamu, but then meeting lots of other people who were, wonderful, but not displaying those qualities of being out and proud that I aspired to for myself and the way I wanted to live my life. So I spent a lot of time between worlds in a way, with people who were like singing their queerness from the rooftops and people who were like whispering it in dark corners. And, I'm more singing it from the rooftops kind of person. So, but I understand why some people will only whisper because, if you're too vocal, you can be attacked. You can be ostracized. You can be, become estranged from people that you still want to keep in your life. So it's a difficult choice to make. And I saw people make the choice one way or the other throughout the years I've been around. And I'm not going to say anyone's choices were wrong. They have made the right choices for themselves,
Would you like to talk about how you express your identity through art, music, fashion, or any other creative outlets?
Mostly I express my identity through writing poetry, through writing stories, fiction and non-fiction. I do picture books for younger kids. I do young adult novels and I write for adults as well. And, I always have Black queer kind of characters in my stories. Even in the picture book, there's a gay uncle who takes his nieces to Pride and goes along, and they have a wonderful day. And then also there's a gay wedding in this picture book. And then in Black Flamingo, it's about a boy discovering himself through doing drag performance. And that's something I've done myself. So drag performance was a really big way for me to learn more about my community, because I think drag's such an important part of the queer community. And I learned a lot about myself and my identity and kind of how I wanted to be seen in the world. And, every day, what's the quote? You're born naked and everything else is drag. And I feel like that when I chose to put on a colorful shirt today, it was for a reason. I knew I was coming here and I wanted to kind of represent the kind of way I wanted to feel in this interview. I wanted to feel bold and colorful and kind of joyful. And so, when I get dressed every day, I'm thinking about what's right for what time, what moment I'm kind of approaching and how I want to be in that moment. And so, through self-expression, through clothes, sometimes through makeup, but mostly it's through writing. That's my main form of kind of expression and using my voice, speaking up when called to. I've often found myself in rooms where I'm the representative of, Black queer people. I'm on a panel and there's no one else Black or queer. So I have to kind of speak on both things, whether it's diversity panels or panels about literature. I often feel it's a lot of pressure to be the one voice, but I feel like I'm in conversation and a community with lots of other people. So that's what I try and remember, that, yes, there's me, but there's so many others for people to find. And, even in my book, Black Flamingo, I have a whole list of names of other Black queer people that I find inspiring. So if people read that book, they can go and look up all these other people. And, that's my kind of hope, is that my story is seen as one of many stories. And and I just feel lucky that I feel comfortable to, put my full name, to show my face, to be able to talk openly about all my experiences, the good and the bad, and, the challenging and the joyous. And, and I hope that gives someone some, hope, optimism, that they feel seen in my story, that they learn from my story and feel some empathy. Any of those things would be great.
Thank you so much for being so candid and sharing your story with us.
Thank you.